Now available on Blu-ray from Arrow Home Video is He Came from the Swamp, the William Grefe collection, which is, if you're not familiar with William Grefe, he was a Florida filmmaker based in Florida, shot most of his films there, that really worked in the genre of exploitation, horror, low budget, a lot of Everglades in these films. And probably his best known film, the one that I initially knew, was The Jaws of Death from, I believe, 1976-ish, which was released in the wake of Jaws. Fun movie. That's a film that got some play on TV, got some play on video. But for the most part, these films have not seen a lot of action outside of theaters when they were originally released. Something Weird Video came along in the sometime in the 90s or early 2000s, I believe, and they released a very nice DVD set of Sting of Death and Death Curse of Tartu, which are the first two films on this set that I'm going to talk about. And they had released a lot of his films in one form or another on VHS and some DVD-Rs, I think. But as far as mainstream audiences go, I think his body of work is a body that is still yet to be fully rediscovered. But sets like this Arrow set and what Something Weird was doing are probably going to go a long way, at least among hardcore film fans and scholars and genre fans, to sort of shine a light again on what he was doing down there in Florida for so many years. So I'm going to kind of try to go through all of these. I actually did watch every second of everything on this set, which I don't always have time to do, but circumstances as they are right now, I have plenty of time. So I listened and looked at everything. So first up from 1966, we have The Sting of Death, which in essence is a film about a jellyfish man stalking and stinging to death, thus the title, teenagers and trespassers in the Everglades when they're not having sock hops and poolside rump-shaking parties to the tunes of legitimately to the singing sensation sounds of Neil Sedaka telling you how to do the jellyfish. Never a hit, but with better distribution, it might have been. Basically, you have this, it's like a 50s monster movie. It feels very much like a more competent Herschel Gordon Lewis movie, where you have the acting is of a lower end caliber. You don't expect it in a movie like The Sting of Death to have Laurence Olivier in there, and the cinematography is just fine, and the colors, the transfer on this film, the colors are astounding. There are sequences in the lair of the jellyfish man where the colors are, dare I say, Bava-esque. It's amazing to watch this film. Even when I wasn't being entertained by what was going on, which in this film I was more often than not entertained by what I was watching, it looked so good. And it's such a snapshot of a place and time. The clothes, the hair, the vehicles, the interiors, the exteriors. It's Florida 1966, and it was gorgeous. So it's a fun, silly little movie. It's very, very ripe for the Mystery Science Theater's type of treatment if you're into that sort of thing. But I just had a good time with this. It's just sort of, there are some effects that are a little creepy. I was going to say this is a squeaky clean monster movie, but some of the victims of the deadly stinger who walks on 2 feet were a little gruesome at times. So, again, that almost vaguely in the mindset of Herschel Gordon Lewis, who was making movies at the same time in the same state, if not the same area. So the comparisons are, ripe to be drawn. Tons of extras on this, and I'll just sort of maybe blanket say this about everything so I don't keep repeating it over and over again. Every film has an audio commentary. Most are William Grefe, the director, with Frank Henenlotter, director of Basket Case and Brain Damage and Frankenhooker and Bad Biology and many other things, who was, in with the Something Weird gang, and they're a hoot to listen to. Henenlotter is entertained by Grefe's stories. He knows the business, so he has really astute questions that he asks, and they're just as, if not more, entertaining than the film sometimes. And Something Weird was good with commentaries like that. So the commentaries that Henenlotter did with Grefe mostly are ported over from older Something Weird releases, or a couple of them are, let's say. And then I think there's one or two that just have Grefe by himself. So you get interviews with people who worked on these films. You get a lot of interviews with historians about these films. You get trailers. You get all kinds of stuff. And as is often the case, as is often the case now, I'm watching this DVD set, and it's like, hey, Chris Pajali, I know that guy. Hey, Mike Gingold, I know that guy. it's so funny to see friends of mine showing up on extras on these Blu-ray sets, and it happens again and again and again. It's really cool because during lockdown and quarantine in these times we currently live in, depending on when you watch this, you can't see everybody you used to see all the time. So I find myself seeing friends I haven't seen in a while on my TV screen, and that's kind of cool. Anyway, the second feature on disc 1 of the William Grefe collection is Death Curse of Tartu. This was filmed basically to be a co-feature for Sting of Death when it played in drive-ins, and it was thrown together pretty quickly. And I didn't like it as much as Death Curse of Tartu. I didn't like it as much as Sting of Death. I remember Tartu having a little bit more going on in it. And basically, somebody, correct me if I'm wrong, I often am. Basically, somebody disturbs the hallowed burial ground of the ancient Indian spirit Tartu, who awakens in his crypt and he takes the form of various animals that are in the Everglades and attacks people. You do see Tartu as himself toward the end, but my memory of this was that you saw him walking around killing people, sort of like the Aztec mummy or something, and that's not the case with this. It really is more people suffering snake attack and alligator attack and all sorts of attacks like that. To me, this had a little bit less going on in it than Sting of Death did. I keep wanting to call it jellyfish because that's what goes in my mind. That's Sedaka. He could weave a toe tapping tune. Also has the same look, that era shot around the same time. So there's plenty of Everglades. There's plenty of airboat action. There's plenty of stalking through tall grass. There's plenty of youths, shaking what God gave them to the tune of the go-go beat throughout. So it's not a bad double feature. To me, a good double feature is your A picture and your B picture, and one is usually better than the other, but together they make a great tastation. And Death Curse of Tartu and Sting of Death have always been together in my head because that's how they were released originally, but that's how I first came to know them, through the old Something Weird release. So then that's disc 1. So each of these discs have films that are sort of themed. They're chronological and they're sort of themed because he was working through various little genres as he went along. So this is 2 sort of drug films, sort of counterculture movies. First up, from 1968, we have The Hooked Generation, and this is more of a crime thriller than it is anything else. And it's a bunch of like drug smugglers. They kill some people and they steal some things from the Coast Guard, and there's Cubans and Castro communists involved, and they wind up going on the run and taking some people hostage. And it's really a thriller of, who will survive and what will be left of them. One of my favorite taglines. As these guys, one of the guys is a junkie and the other guys dabble in this and that, and they're trying to get from point A to point B and survive and make the big score, but not all get taken out by the police. So this I found interesting. I didn't love it, but it was interesting because it was some familiar faces, some familiar exploitation faces, and some familiar Floridian thespic faces. Rooney Kerwin, or Bill Kerwin, who is in a lot of the Herschel Gordon Lewis movies, is in several of these Grefe films, and he's a really good actor. He's a cool guy to see in anything. He's one of those guys that whenever I see him, it perks me up a little bit because he's just kind of likable, even if he's playing a dirtbag in some of these films. So he's in there, and you see a few other people. Some of the counterculture aspects are a little comical now. They're a little kitschy, maybe a little, something that you might have a source of humor at, like sort of some of the effects of when people are on something, or the trappings of the era with decor and clothes and terminology and all that, and music. Yes, there are more bikini girls go-go dancing in this film, and yes, there are more long walks through the Everglades, which are staples throughout the majority of these films. This one I didn't quite care for as much as the first 2, but it is much more serious in tone, and it's not a bad little thriller. This is the kind of thing that would play, at a local theater or a drive-in back in the era, and probably did pretty good business. Obviously, he did good business with these films because he kept making them for long enough, and it was an era, maybe more so than now, where audiences were willing to watch a movie based on a good poster or based on a good trailer that didn't necessarily have really big recognizable faces in them. So second on this disc with Hooked Generation is The Psychedelic Priest. This one is strange. This is a movie that part of what I find interesting about this too is I'm watching all these extras and I'm finding out the story behind the film we're watching. And The Psychedelic Priest, when I watched it, I thought it was kind of a slog. It's basically this young priest who decides to chuck it all and go off in search of truth and mingles with hippies and falls in love and gets addicted to various substances. And will he survive and what will be left of him? It's very much a film of its era. 1971 was the release for this. And it has some really interesting scenes of the guy walking around various areas of California. So I'm a sucker for snapshots of the past. So clothes, music, cars, interiors, exteriors, old storefronts, and things like that. And you get some of that in here. The acting is not that great. It feels like a documentary at times. And according to the extras, some of it sort of was. Basically, it was a film that was shot with no script. And Grefe did the best he could to get something out of it, and they got something out of it. I'm not sure it ever had much of a release. It might be one of those films where it played a little here or there, maybe, but really it wasn't until something weird resurrected it that people were seeing it on a larger scale than they would have otherwise. Again, the lesser of the two films for me, but fascinating in light of what he talks about on the extras in the commentary. Up next is The Naked Zoo from 1970. Nothing to do with animals, clothed or unclothed. Oh, the people in these are kind of animalistic at times. Basically, you have Stephen Oliver, who was a TV actor and was in some films he was in some biker movies. He was in Motorcycle for Russ Meyer, and Rita Hayworth in a very late period role for her. And basically, Oliver is a young writer and a swinger and a hip daddy, and the sort of the kept man of Rita Hayworth, who's a sort of a affluent woman who has a motorized wheelchair-bound husband, and they have their dalliances, and she keeps, Stephen Oliver comfortable with checks that let him live the lifestyle that he sees fit. And at some point, the husband finds out that Oliver and Hayworth are having a dalliance, and there's a scuffle, and the husband is killed. And the rest of the movie is Stephen Oliver trying to break free of this relationship with Rita Hayworth, or manipulate her enough to keep getting the checks, but not be bound to her. And basically, he's kind of a dirtbag. This was a film where it was hard to know who to root for, if anybody, because Oliver is just a creep, and everybody else is just in it for whatever they're in it for. So this film has a lot more go-go dancing, a lot more bikini girls with go-go dancing. From my recollection, though, a lack of airboats and Everglades walking. It's interesting. It's very much a melodrama. This is sort of one of those kind of hooking on to some of the counterculture fringe aspects of the time, swinging and salaciousness on screen and things like that. Very much a soapy melodrama. It feels to me actually like the mid-period Russ Meyer films, sort of like the Finders, Keepers, Lovers, Weepers era, that era where he was doing sort of these salacious soap opera kind of movies. So it's sort of like a RM film minus the bounties that his films usually contain. This is interesting too, again, when you delve into the extras. There's two versions of this movie you can watch. You can watch the director's cut, which was reassembled for either the Something Weird release or for this one, and you can watch the Barry Mann, the distributor's cut, where he went in and he shot a bunch of nude scenes that he cut into the film. A performance by Canned Heat is in this extra version of the film, or the version that got released, I should say. So it's very interesting. What I did is I watched the director's cut, and you can see where you're watching things that were cut by the original distributor, because the image quality goes from shockingly pristine to a little softer, a little bit of damage, because I think these things were probably sitting in a can for 40 or 50 years. And then it looks perfect otherwise. The Mann version, the version that came out, looks gorgeous all the way through. So I watched the director's cut to see what Grefe originally intended, and then I went back and I sort of fast-forwarded through the theatrical release to see what was different. And it is interesting. I've always been impressed or amused by how distributors or filmmakers would try to spice something up by doing, inserts into films, so to speak. Pun intended, often the time, and see how well it matched and see how much it stuck out as being natural or not. And the nude inserts, they do seem a little off, especially if you know that those weren't intended to be in there. And there's one extra little scene that was put in there. The Canned Heat seems fairly natural because it's a big party and it's just like they just swing over to one wall and hey, it's Canned Heat performing. So that's kind of cool, especially if you're a fan of Canned Heat. That's a performance that doesn't exist anywhere else as far as I know. So again, the extras inform my enjoyment of the film. I didn't really love the film. I thought it was okay. It was an okay melodrama slash thriller of the time. But once I get the context in the commentary and those extras about how it was made and how it finally got released and what it took to make it, like with a lot of these, I kind of appreciated it a lot more. I appreciated that Bill Grefe was able to have a career shooting movies in Florida, in and out of the Everglades for as long as he did, because these are movies that, they made enough money at the time for people to keep having him make films, even though they have been sort of forgotten. Maybe they were never known by the majority of America, but it's really cool that sets like this give us the chance to delve back into this stuff, see what was going on back then, see the kind of movies that these all, aside from Psychedelic Priest, these all played in theaters. So these are movies that people went out and paid to see on the big screen. So it's really cool to see, what some of our elders, or if you're lucky to be old enough, maybe some of you saw in the theater or the drive-in probably back in the 60s and 70s. From 1976 is probably, if you've seen a Bill Grefe movie, it's probably this one. It's Mako, Jaws of Death, a.k.a. The Jaws of Death. This was a film that Grefe had intended to make before Jaws came out, but once Jaws came out, suddenly everybody wanted to make a shark movie, so Sharksploitation was born and this film got made. This was written by Robert W. Morgan, who's an actor, renowned Bigfoot hunter, a very interesting guy, and there's an extra with him on there about his involvement with this film and just some of his life anyway, which is fascinating. Grindhouse Pictures has a Blu-ray out of his film entitled Bloodstalkers that I actually shot some of the extras for. Morgan, very interesting guy. So basically this film stars Richard Jekyll, who many of you would remember from, I believe he was in The Dirty Dozen. He was in a lot of other movies in the 60s and 70s. In The Green Slime. I can guarantee he's in The Green Slime, which I love. Jekyll plays a veteran who was about to be killed in either, I think it was World War II or Korea, and somehow he was saved by sharks. Sharks came to his aid and took out his pursuers, and he's had a kinship with sharks ever since, and he has a bunch of sharks he feeds and takes care of in his little, I want to say shack, I want to say hut, his lovely home in Florida. And he's sort of thought as a weirdo by that. People call him shark lover, as though it's like a really nasty term. And he sees people hunting shark for sport and for bounties, and it ticks him off, and he tries to avenge that to a degree. And then at some point, some of the sharks that he considers his friends are killed or abused by locals that he sort of knows, and he just loses it. He goes crazy, and he starts hunting people the way people hunt sharks in the water. One of them being Harold Oddjob Sakata from Goldfinger is in this film. It's in a couple Grefe movies. And he enacts shark-based revenge. And that's something I've always remembered and loved about this movie, is when Jekyll goes off, he goes off spectacularly, and he kills people. He uses his friends, the sharks, to enact revenge. Again, shot in Florida, very Florida type of movie in terms of the decor and the settings and the period. Some of it takes place in one of those bars that has a big open sort of fish tank that a woman dressed as a mermaid swims around in. And it just feels very much of its time and place. And it's good. I don't really in any way consider it a Jaws ripoff. If anything, it capitalized on the success of Jaws because sharks were popular at the time, but the movie has nothing to do with that. It's not like, this isn't Great White, which I also love. The Great White is basically just Jaws again. Mako is something else, and it is something else. I really liked it. The transfer here from Arrow, it doesn't look great. It's very sharp. It just doesn't have that vibrant colors and look that some of the earlier films had on this set, and that could all be down to the original photography, how the elements were saved, whatever. It's great to have a legit HD copy of Mako on Blu-ray finally. It's a movie that I had a scurrilous copy of from the internet for many years that really didn't look good at all. It looked like maybe the worst version of it ever did on TV, but it's nice to have a good copy of this now. Again, you have some really cool extras. Mike Gingold from Fangoria has a nice extra about sharksploitation cinema and the whole history of that, which puts this film in the context of its era and sort of gives you a nice little checklist of other things you might want to watch. And it's, again, Mako, Jaws of Death, 1976, a heck of a lot of fun. One thing Mako has that's also kind of interesting to me, and I've seen other video releases over the years since the DVD era do this, they have the Super 8 version. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Super 8 was a home format of film, a little skinny strip of film that you would watch, much like your home movies back in the day. And they made versions of films for the home. They made, You got your 50 foot, you got your 100 foot, you got your 400 foot. You had like a 3-minute version of a scene that would often be silent in black and white. You might get a longer version with color. They had various versions depending on how much money you wanted to spend of these films. And there was a 15-minute condensed version of Mako released for the home market. And it's really interesting. The transfer on it's quite good too. It's really interesting to see how you condense a movie that's an hour and a half down to 15 minutes. I've always been impressed with editing and editors, something I enjoy doing myself. And how do you take a story and keep cutting it down and still maintain all the elements that tell that story? And if you want to see how that was done, one of the extras on the Mako Jaws of Death disc has that. From 1977 is Whiskey Mountain. This is a movie that I'd already seen once before. I'd purchased the DVD of They Came from the Swamp, which was a documentary about Bill Grefe's life and films, which is also on this, and I think a slightly longer version is on this Blu-ray set. This Whiskey Mountain was an extra on that, and at the time I watched it, I didn't really get into it that much for whatever reason. But this time I really, really liked this. This is a film that has Christopher George and Linda Day George and Roberta Collins and another guy. They're two couples that go off into the mountains in, I believe it's North Carolina, where Grefe had a home, and they're going out there because Linda Day George, her grandfather buried some guns in a cave that were supposedly Civil War era guns and really valuable now. And they wanted to go out and sort of find the treasure in the mountains. And they were dirt bike people anyway. So they were going to go make it a dirt bike camping trip and find this, hidden bounty. The locals don't cotton to that sort of thing. They don't cotton to strangers. And they do everything they can to upset the progress of this trip that these people are taking. Eventually it turns out, I don't want to say what it turns out to be because it's a cool surprise. Something happens where suddenly the locals are really aggressively trying to get rid of our heroes. They kidnap the women. The guys are trying to figure out how to rescue them and fight off the bad guys. There's this weird cackling old, mostly nonverbal mountain man that you keep showing up here and there, which unfortunately took a little bit away from the film's overall effect for me because I found him more silly than scary or anything. And he was an actor I'd recognized. He was in the old Charles Band dirty comedy Fairy Tales. He played, I think, the king in Fairy Tales, and he's been in a lot of other things. He's in Mako as well, shaven. He's a guy who's fishing on a boat. So otherwise, this is a really good thriller. The action is really good. The locations are gorgeous. You just want to be where this film is taking place. It has that great sense of time and place. This but this rural little mountain town with all the old storefronts and the inside of its old hardware store. I'm a sucker for the inside of old hardware stores, apparently. But I really love this look back. The version of this. It isn't perfect. It's an HD upgrade from what we had on the DVD I was talking about earlier. So it's got spics and specks, and it's a print that's seen some life. But it didn't really bother me. It felt like a really pristine version of what you would see on an old Something Weird tape, basically. Beautiful widescreen theme song by Charlie Daniels. It's just I really liked Whiskey Mountain a lot. It really was, to me, a good second feature at a drive-in. A good Saturday afternoon movie to watch with, nice, like my youth, a nice sunny Saturday afternoon spent on the couch watching old movies. Whiskey Mountain I thought was a lot of fun and maybe my favorite film on the set. Whiskey Mountain or, as far as the narrative films go, Whiskey Mountain or Sting of Death were probably my favorites, but I think Whiskey Mountain may have the edge just because I'm a sucker for the 70s and outdoorsy, dirt bikey revenge movies and things like that. The last thing on this set, amongst all of the voluminous extras, is the best extra you could have on this, which is They Came from the Swamp, the documentary about William Grefe's career and life. This was made in 2016. It's excellent. It's a movie that I bought from the original website, I think, when it came out. And it's an hour and a half or 2 hours going chronologically through just about all of Grefe's films, interviewing a lot of the actors who he worked with, a lot of the crew he had worked with. And then again, some historians. Again, Chris Pajali shows up in this. And it's just a blast. It's wacky stories. It's amazing stories of getting things done with little to no money and resources, or figuring out when something goes wrong, how to fix it, which is one of the great things that Grefe and other low-budget filmmakers had going for them. Is it was just like, what, we can't shoot there? Well, I've got a garage, whatever. You make it work because you got to get it done. And so thoroughly entertaining. Some duplication of stories you'll hear through some of the extras and this documentary, but this documentary was made first, so hey. But it's wonderful. And again, as I said, I think it might be a longer version than was on the DVD. The documentary was directed by Daniel Griffith, who is the head of Ballyhoo Motion Pictures, who's a name you'll see a lot. If you like the kind of movies that I like, you see a lot on the extras of various DVDs and Blu-rays. The little Ballyhoo logo that always reminds me, I'm sure intentionally, of House on Haunted Hill. So it's somebody who knows his way around shooting interviews and getting really good stories out of people. So graphically, the little interstitials they have between each film are a blast. It looks phenomenal. It sounds phenomenal. It's a really, really good time. And it's a great way to end this set. It's almost a great way to start this set if you want to get a good sense of some of the stories and who this person is, as far as his filmography and where he came from. I don't think it has too many major spoilers, but you never know. I tend to save all the extras for last so that I don't know anything about the movie before I watch it. So in the end, this is a phenomenal set. This is the man's work is very entertaining overall. What he was able to achieve repeatedly is very impressive. You get one thing that's cool. So Bill Grefe made feature films throughout the 60s and 70s, and then he got a gig shooting promotional films for Bacardi, and then just shifted on doing that. So they're basically like these long-form commercials or things that were intended not necessarily for the public, maybe more for distributors or people in the industry. Something they get into on the DVD version of it's in the movie itself. In the They Came from the Swamp documentary, you see a bunch of clips that Grefe had developed a relationship with William Shatner. He made a film called Impulse with Shatner, and he worked with Shatner on a lot of these, or at least a couple of these Bacardi short films. And there's excerpts or a full one on the original DVD for They Came from the Swamp. On this Blu-ray set, we get a different one that's sort of an Old West themed Western themed short film for Bacardi, and it's fascinating. It's the kind of thing the public would never see. It's very entertaining. It's very cute, and it's interesting to see where this guy's career went, lucratively, where it went from making feature films all the time. So anyway, I've been rambling a lot about this. This is a great set. If you love exploitation movies like I do, it's pretty essential. If you like Greffe's films, I don't know why you wouldn't want to get this. I would love if somebody out there, if this set was maybe successful enough that we got another set of Grefe films so that we could fill in the gaps, because there's still a lot that I've never seen, and I would love to see them in a format like this. So at any rate, He Came from the Swamp, the William Grefe collection, out now on Blu-ray from Arrow Home Video.